The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days in Pine Hollow. The kind of slow, endless drizzle that blurred the edges of the town until everything looked washed out and weary. The trees, the peeling storefronts, even the faces of the people who pretended not to notice the rot spreading underneath. Noor Malik pulled her coat tighter as she walked up the gravel road that led to the old schoolhouse, her shoes crunching on the damp stones. She'd been teaching here for 6 years now, long enough for everyone to know her as the quiet woman who kept to herself, always marking papers after class while the others went to drink at Marty's bar. No one knew she kept an old file box hidden beneath the floorboards of her home, a box full of her father's papers, reports and maps, the ones that had gotten him killed. Back then, Pine Hollow had been alive with industry. Blake Mining and Timber had promised jobs and prosperity, cutting deep into the forest and digging out veins of copper that glinted like blood under lantern light. Noor's father, Hamid Malik, had been a local engineer, hired to inspect water systems and soil runoff. When he discovered that the company had been dumping waste into the river, the same river that ran past the school, the farms, the homes, he'd written a report and taken it to the town council. A week later, his car was found at the bottom of the quarry. They called it an accident. Noor was 16 then. Now, 12 years later, the town still carried the smell of wet ash and rust whenever the wind blew from the north. Noor never talked about her father, not even when her mother fell ill and moved to her sister's house upstate. She stayed behind, not out of love for Pine Hollow, but because she couldn't let it win. Every morning she watched the children play near the same river that had killed so many crops, sickened so many families. The council told people the water was fine, but the fish were gone, and the soil turned gray when it rained. Noor knew better. That morning, she unlocked her classroom, brushed chalk dust from her desk, and stared out at the fog crawling over the trees. The air felt heavy, like a storm waiting for permission. A knock on the door pulled her back. It was Anna Blake, the mayor's daughter, 17, sharp-eyed and restless in that way only small-town kids could be. "Miss Malik," she said, clutching a folder, "can I talk to you after class?" Noor nodded, watching her closely. There was something fragile in the girl's voice, like she was carrying a secret she didn't know how to hold. When the last bell rang, Anna lingered by the window. "It's about my dad," she began quietly. Noor's breath caught. The Blakes had run Pine Hollow for decades, first through the mines, then the timber, now the council. He's been meeting with some men, late at night. They keep talking about the wells. I think they're hiding something. Noor gestured for her to sit. "What kind of men?" "Out-of-towners. They drive black trucks with no plates. One of them had a scar on his hand. He's been here before. I saw him at the quarry." "The quarry's been closed for years," Noor said. Anna shook her head. "Not anymore." Later that night, Noor drove past the old quarry road. The forest was silent except for the rain whispering through the leaves. Half a mile in, she saw the glow, floodlights cutting through the mist, trucks parked in neat rows. Men moved like shadows, carrying barrels and cables. She stopped her car and watched through the cracked windshield. Then she saw him, Mayor Blake himself, standing near the pit with a clipboard in hand. Her heart pounded. She pulled out her phone, tried to take a picture, but a sudden flash of lightning lit up the trees, and one of the men turned toward her headlights. She ducked, trembling, waiting for the sound of boots. None came. After a long moment, she reversed the car and sped away. Back at her cottage, Noor spread out her father's papers on the table. Diagrams of pipelines, chemical symbols, old letters stamped with the Blake Mining logo. The handwriting in one of the letters caught her eye. Containment wells established south of town, effluent storage ongoing. Ensure public records remain sealed. The signature was unmistakable. Mayor Charles Blake. Noor sat back, her pulse thudding in her ears. It wasn't just history repeating. It was the same people, same families, still poisoning the land and silencing anyone who asked questions. Her father had died for trying to stop them, and now they were doing it again. She couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the pit, the glow of those floodlights cutting through the rain. By morning, she made a decision. She went to see Noor, the only journalist in the county who still printed her stories on paper instead of screens. Noor ran a small paper called The Hollow Voice, out of a converted storage room behind the grocery store. Noor placed the old documents on the desk. "These are my father's," she said, "and I think they're doing it again." Nora flipped through the pages, eyes narrowing. "If this is real, it's bigger than Pine Hollow. But you'll need proof, recent proof. Photos, samples, names. I can get them," Noor said. For the next week, she did just that. At dawn, she followed trucks through the back roads, hiding her car behind trees, noting license numbers and routes. At night, she returned to the quarry, camera in hand, every click echoing like a heartbeat. She gathered soil from near the runoff pipes, sealed them in jars, labeled each one. On the 7th night, as she crouched near the fence, someone grabbed her shoulder. She spun. It was Anna. "You can't be here," the girl hissed. "They'll kill you if they find you." "You came anyway," Noor said quietly. "I had to warn you. They know someone's been snooping. My dad's furious. He said if he finds out who—" She stopped, eyes darting to the lights ahead. "I think he already knows." A noise came from behind, engines revving. Noor ducked low, pulling Anna down with her. Through the fence they saw 2 trucks pull up. Men climbed out, dragging a body-sized tarp between them. They heaved it into the pit. Anna gasped softly, hand over her mouth. "We have to go," Noor whispered. They crawled back toward the trees, every step like glass breaking. When they finally reached the car, Noor looked back one last time. The floodlights were brighter now, reflecting off the surface of the pit like a mirror. Something dark was floating just beneath. By the time they reached town, Anna was shaking. "I shouldn't have told you," she said. "You did the right thing," Noor told her. "But now you have to disappear for a while. Stay with someone you trust." Anna's eyes filled with tears. "What about you?" "I'm not done yet." Noor waited until Anna's taillights vanished down Main Street, then sat alone in her car, hands gripping the wheel. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. The last thing he ever said before that final drive to the council meeting. "If you ever find something wrong, Noor, don't let them bury it." Now she finally understood what he meant, and she wasn't going to let them. The next morning, Pine Hollow looked deceptively calm. The sun broke through the fog, casting soft gold light over the wet rooftops. But beneath that peace lay a pulse of unease. Noor could feel it as she walked through the market square, eyes following her, conversations dying mid-sentence. Rumors had already started. Someone had seen her car near the quarry. Someone said she'd been meeting with outsiders. The town had a way of sniffing out rebellion before it bloomed. She stopped at the newspaper office where Nora Dale was already hunched over her desk, typing fast. The room smelled of ink and coffee, the walls plastered with old headlines. Local hero dies in accident. Blake timber expands north. Noor recognized her father's name in one, hidden in the fine print. Nora looked up. "You were out there again last night, weren't you?" "I got photos," Noor said, sliding the camera across the desk. "And something else." She handed over the sealed jars. "Water samples. From the runoff pipes." Nora frowned. "You're playing with fire." "I'm done playing," Noor said quietly. Nora examined the evidence, her brow furrowed. "If the lab results show what I think they will, this isn't just contamination. It's deliberate dumping. You realize what this means? It means they killed my father for trying to stop it, Noor said, her voice trembling but firm. And they think no one will do anything again. The door creaked open. Both women turned. A man stood there, tall, wearing a deputy's uniform. Sheriff Allen, Cole's replacement after the old one retired. He gave a polite nod. "Morning, ladies. Miss Malik, Mayor Blake wants to see you at the council office." Noor tensed. "Why?" He shrugged. "Said it's about school funding. Shouldn't take long." Nora shot her a warning glance, but Noor forced a calm smile. "Tell him I'll be there in an hour." When the deputy left, Nora leaned forward. "Don't go alone." "I have to," Noor said. "If I don't, they'll know I'm scared." An hour later, Noor stood in front of the council hall, a brick building with ivy crawling up its sides like veins. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and money. Mayor Charles Blake sat behind his polished desk, silver hair slicked back, his tie perfectly knotted. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Noor Malik," he said warmly. "You've been busy." She met his gaze. "I'm just doing my job. As a teacher? Or as a journalist now?" His tone sharpened slightly. "People have been talking. You've been asking questions that might be best left alone. Like my father did?" she said before she could stop herself. Blake's expression hardened. "Your father was a good man. He made mistakes. Don't make the same ones. Is that a threat?" He stood, walking to the window. "It's advice. Pine Hollow survives because we know how to keep peace. We don't dig up the past and we don't spread lies." He turned back, eyes cold. "Be smart, Miss Malik. You have a good job. Children who look up to you. Don't throw it away." Noor said nothing. She turned and walked out, her hands trembling only once she was outside. She could feel his gaze on her back until she reached the steps. That evening, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "We saw you at the quarry. Stop or you'll end up like him." Attached was a photo, her father's car wreck, pulled from the river 12 years ago. Noor dropped the phone, her stomach twisting. Then came another message. "Last warning." She took a shaky breath, picked up the phone, and deleted the text, but not before forwarding it to Nora. A minute later, Nora called. "You're done waiting," she said. "We release what we have tomorrow." "Not yet," Noor said. "We need one thing more, proof that Blake's still dumping. If we get that, no one can bury it again." That night, Noor drove north, past the fields, past the last streetlight, into the woods that bordered the quarry. She parked the car behind an abandoned barn and walked the rest of the way. The moonlight was thin, barely enough to see the dirt road. Somewhere in the distance, an engine hummed. She crouched behind a tree, camera ready. Then she saw it. 2 trucks, same black paint, no license plates. Men unloading barrels marked with faded hazard symbols. She zoomed in, the lens trembling. The flash accidentally clicked. The men froze, one of them shouted. A flashlight beam cut across the trees. Noor turned and ran. Branches clawed at her coat as she stumbled through the mud, breath sharp in her chest. She could hear them behind her shouting, boots pounding. She reached the barn, ducked inside, and hid behind a pile of rusted tools. The beam of a flashlight swept past the door, lingered, then moved on. Minutes passed before she dared to move. Her hands shook as she checked the camera. The last photo had captured everything. The trucks, the barrels, even one man's face clearly in frame. Relief washed over her, sharp and trembling. When she returned home near dawn, she found her door ajar. The air inside smelled faintly of smoke. Her living room was ransacked, papers scattered, drawers open. But the floorboard under her desk was still intact. She pulled it up, retrieved the file box, and held it close. There was a sound behind her, a creak. She turned sharply. Nothing. Then a whisper, faint but unmistakable. "You should have stayed gone." She spun toward the hallway. No one there. Just the wind pushing through a broken window. The next day, Nora published the first piece. Toxic Wells, The Secret Beneath Pine Hollow. It spread fast, picked up by regional news. The council denied everything. Mayor Blake called it baseless conspiracy. But the photos told another story. Then, something strange happened. Anna Blake disappeared. No one had seen her since 2 nights before. Her friends said she'd gone to visit her aunt in Millbury, but her car was still parked near the library. The town buzzed with gossip, but Noor's gut twisted with guilt. Anna had known too much, and she'd warned her father's enemy. 3 days later, Sheriff Allen showed up at Noor's door again. "Miss Malik," he said gravely, "we're asking everyone some questions. When's the last time you saw Anna Blake?" 2 nights ago, Noor said, voice steady. "At the diner." He studied her, eyes narrow. "You sure about that?" "Positive." He nodded slowly. "Funny thing, someone said they saw you driving near the quarry again, middle of the night." "I couldn't sleep," she said. His smile was thin. "Well, let's hope you don't dream too loud, ma'am." After he left, Noor sat in silence. The walls felt closer somehow, the ticking clock louder. Then she noticed her father's map, which had hung beside the bookshelf for years, was gone. Someone had been inside again. That night, she didn't go home. She stayed at Nora's office instead, helping her sort through the last batch of documents. Nora looked exhausted but determined. "If we vanish," she said, half joking, "make sure this gets to the state paper." She slid a flash drive into Noor's hand. "Everything we've got. Don't lose it," Noor nodded. "I won't." Hours passed. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. At midnight, the phone rang. An unknown number again. Nora answered, putting it on speaker. A distorted voice filled the room. "You don't understand what you're doing," it said. "Leave it alone." "Who is this?" Nora demanded. The line went dead. A minute later, the lights flickered and went out. Through the dark window, headlights glowed. 2 vehicles pulling up outside. Nora's pulse jumped. "We have to go," she whispered. Nora grabbed the files, and they slipped out the back door just as footsteps echoed inside. They ran down the alley, rain slashing at their faces. Behind them, someone shouted, "Stop!" Gunfire cracked the night, a warning shot. Nora stumbled, clutching her arm. "Keep going!" she yelled. Noor dragged her toward the old church, its steeple a black silhouette against the storm. They burst through the side door and hid behind the pews. Outside, the vehicles idled for a while, then drove off. The 2 women sat in silence, breathing hard. Finally, Nora whispered, "You can still walk away, Noor. Just give me the drive and disappear." Noor shook her head. "If I leave now, they win again. And Anna, she's gone because of me." "Then make them pay," Nora said quietly. Noor looked up at the stained glass window, the faint light of dawn breaking through colors of red and gold. The storm had passed, but in her heart, something darker was taking shape. This wasn't about proving her father right anymore. It was about justice, the kind Pine Hollow had never seen, and she was done waiting for permission to take it. The next morning arrived wrapped in a silence that didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy, like the town itself was holding its breath. A gray fog rolled through Pine Hollow, softening the outlines of houses and power lines, muting the sound of early trucks on Main Street. Noor sat at her small wooden table, a cup of black coffee cooling untouched beside her. Her fingers traced the edge of an old file she had found in the back of the school's archives the night before. Environmental Department, 1979-1982. The folder smelled of dust and mildew, but inside were pieces that made her pulse quicken. Letters signed by the town council, Contracts with a chemical company called Hollard Creek Processing. Maps of the forested valley behind the school where the creek once ran clear. But the most damning part wasn't the documents. It was the faded photograph tucked between them. A line of barrels, half buried in the dirt, marked with yellow radiation symbols, the same ground where the new recreation center now stood. Her heart sank. The children who played there, the soil that had been turned for decades, everything was built on poison. Noor pressed her hands to her temples. She wanted to scream, but she didn't. Instead, she whispered, "You knew, all of you knew." Later that day, she went to see Reverend Collins, one of the oldest men in Pine Hollow, who had lived through the years the dumping took place. His house stood at the edge of town, surrounded by dying birch trees. The air smelled faintly of rust and wet leaves. He opened the door with a tremor in his hand. "Miss Noor, it's been a long time since I saw a teacher out this way," he said, voice brittle. "I need to ask about the creek," she said. His eyes darted toward the window. "The creek's been gone 40 years. I think you know that's not what I mean." He hesitated, then stepped aside. The inside of his house was a museum of forgotten years, yellowed photographs, dust on every frame. He motioned for her to sit. "They paid us to stay quiet," he said finally. "Back then, folks thought a few barrels didn't matter. But then the cattle started dying. Then the kids got sick. One of the councilmen tried to report it. Next thing we knew, he'd fallen asleep at the wheel. Drove right into the quarry." Noor felt cold spreading through her chest. "Who signed the deal?" 3 names. Harold Denton, Paul Reeve, and Mayor Fletcher. All long gone, except Fletcher. He still runs the council meetings. She left the Reverend's house as the fog thickened, her coat pulled tight around her shoulders. For the first time in months, her grief for her father mixed with something else, a sharper edge. Purpose. That night, she opened her father's old briefcase again. Inside, beneath old lesson plans, was a faded envelope addressed to the town council. The date, 1980, her father's handwriting. The ink had bled, but the words were still readable. "The dumping at Hollard Creek is poisoning the groundwater. If the school children get sick, their blood will be on your hands." The letter was never sent. Noor's breath trembled as she folded it shut. She understood now why her father had drunk himself into silence before dying. He had tried to stop it once, and they'd ruined him for it. The next day, Noor attended the council's open meeting. The wooden town hall still had the same creaking floorboards she remembered as a child. Mayor Fletcher sat at the head, his silver hair slicked back, his ring catching the fluorescent light. He smiled when he saw her. "Miss Noor," he said, "we're grateful for your work at the school. You've brought new life to the children." She smiled thinly. "Children deserve clean water more than praise." The room stilled. Fletcher's smile faded. "I'm not sure I understand." "I think you do," she said quietly. "You were mayor in 1980. The Hollard Creek contract. It has your signature." A murmur rippled through the few townspeople seated in the back. Fletcher leaned forward. "Be careful what you imply, Miss Noor. Old stories can hurt reputations, including your own." Noor's gaze didn't waver. "Old stories don't rot children's lungs. Chemicals do." She turned and walked out, her pulse pounding. Outside, the cold air bit her cheeks, but it felt cleaner than the room she'd just left. That night, as rain began to fall again, Noor sat by her window, watching headlights pass down the empty road. She knew she had crossed a line, but it was one that could not be uncrossed. The next morning, she found her classroom door unlocked, though she had locked it the evening before. Papers scattered across the floor, drawers open. Her father's letter, gone, she froze. Someone had been inside. She went to the sheriff's office, but Sheriff Lyle, a man with deep-set eyes and a perpetual smirk, only shrugged. "Maybe you misplaced it," he said. "Someone broke in. No signs of forced entry. Maybe you left it open. Happens." Her jaw clenched. "The letter was stolen." "Then I'd suggest you forget about old ghosts. Miss Noor, this town's quiet when people mind their own business." As she stepped outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky still looked bruised. She could feel eyes on her, from the cafe window, from the parked truck across the street. Back at home, she packed the remaining documents into a box and hid them under the loose floorboard by her bed. That night she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made her flinch. At 2 a.m., she rose and walked down to the edge of the creek, or what was left of it. The moonlight caught on the shallow trickle of water, dark and sluggish. She knelt, touched the surface. It smelled faintly metallic. Beneath the ripples something glimmered, a shard of metal. She dug it out with her fingers, a corroded tag that read, "Hollard Processing. 1980, she turned it over, gripping it tight. Proof. When she returned home, she placed the tag beside her father's old photo and whispered, "I'll finish what you started." The next week, Noor started leaking parts of the evidence, small details, copies of contracts, hints dropped anonymously to a local paper in a neighboring town. It drew attention, not enough to expose everything yet, but enough to make people uneasy. Enough to make the powerful nervous. Then one evening, her car brakes failed on the hill road outside town. She barely managed to steer into the ditch. The mechanic later told her the brake line had been cut clean. Noor didn't go to the sheriff. She didn't trust him. Instead, she went quiet, stopped talking to neighbors, stopped going to the cafe. She moved like a shadow through her days, teaching by daylight, investigating by night, and, when the mayor's secretary received an envelope a week later, an unmarked photograph of those same buried barrels glowing in flashlight beams, everyone in the council suddenly remembered how fragile their secrets were. The fear had begun. But Noor wasn't done. She stood by the creek again one evening, fog swirling around her, the faint outline of Pine Hollow behind her, a town that had taken her father, poisoned its children, and called it progress. Her whisper cut through the wind. "This time, you'll drown in your own lies." The next few days in Pine Hollow passed like a held breath. The local newspaper, the Pine Hollow Gazette, printed a short piece on old contamination rumors, but no names were mentioned. The mayor dismissed it as unfounded hysteria, and most people went on pretending nothing had changed. But Noor could feel the tension underneath, spreading like cracks in frozen glass. Every morning she noticed something new. The way Mayor Fletcher's car idled longer outside the school before driving off. The way Sheriff Lyle's deputies now lingered by the corner near her house. Someone had been in her mailbox too, a folded note left inside. It read, "Stop digging, or you'll end up like your father." She didn't flinch. Instead, she pinned the note to her wall, a reminder. That evening, Noor went to see Jacob Hensley, the town's retired journalist who once worked for the Gazette in the late 70s. His cabin stood deep in the woods, surrounded by stacks of rotting newspapers and the faint smell of pine sap. When she arrived, he looked startled but curious. "You're Elia's girl, aren't you? The teacher." "Yes," she said softly, "and I think you wrote about Hollard Creek before they shut you down." His eyes darkened. He motioned her inside. "They made me print a retraction. Said I'd misread the tests. They ruined me. Took my press license." "Then help me fix it," she said. He leaned back, studying her. "You think you can fight them alone? They own this town. The land, the sheriff, the council." "I'm not fighting alone," she said, her voice low. "I have the truth, and I have nothing left to lose." Jacob sighed, then reached into a drawer. He pulled out a faded reel tape recorder. "These are old council meeting recordings. I kept copies before they seized the rest. You might find something." That night, Noor listened to the crackling tape in her small living room. The voices were distorted by static, but she could make out pieces. Barrels buried near the ridge. No one'll find them. Elijah Ward's been asking questions. Handle it quietly. She froze. Her father's name. She rewound it, listened again. The voice was unmistakable. Mayor Fletcher's. Her hand trembled, but her eyes burned with focus. She had her proof now. The next morning, Noor took a risk. She called Nora Dale, a journalist from the nearby city who had recently written about corporate corruption cases. Noor had read her work before, admired her courage. When Nora answered, her tone was cautious. "You said this was about Pine Hollow. It's about a cover-up that's killed this town for 40 years, Noor said. And I have evidence. There was silence on the line then. Send me what you have. If it's real, I'll come. 2 days later, Nora arrived. She was younger than Noor expected. Sharp eyes, quiet voice, dressed in a long coat. They met in the small diner on Main Street. Noor showed her the photographs, the contracts, the tape. Nora listened carefully, expression unreadable. Finally, she said, "This could take them all down. But if they know you have this, they won't wait for lawyers." "I know," Noor said. "Then we move fast." That night, the two women stayed up in Noor's kitchen, piecing together a timeline. Rain fell outside, the soft rhythm against the window mixing with the faint hum of the tape recorder. Noor caught herself staring at the glow of the lamp, the reflection of her father's old photograph beside it. She whispered to herself, "It ends tonight." But the storm had plans of its own. By midnight, the power went out. The house sank into darkness. Nora lit a candle, her face flickering with light. Then they heard it, a car engine idling outside, tires crunching gravel. Noor grabbed the box of evidence and motioned to Nora. "Back door," she whispered. They slipped out into the rain, boots sinking into mud. The headlights swept over the house. Then two figures stepped out, shadows with flashlights and guns. Noor's heart pounded, but she kept moving. They darted into the woods behind the property, branches whipping against their faces. "Who are they?" Nora whispered. "Fletcher's men," Noor said. "He used to have the sheriff do his dirty work. Now he does it himself." Thunder rumbled overhead. They reached a narrow clearing where the creek cut through the trees, black and swollen with rain. Noor stumbled, nearly dropping the box. One of the men shouted behind them, "Stop! You can't hide forever!" Noor looked at Nora. "Keep running. I'll lead them off." "No," Nora hissed. "We stay together." But Noor was already moving. She ran along the creek's edge, flashlight beam slicing through rain. Shots rang out. One hit the water beside her, sending up a splash of mud. She ducked behind a fallen log, chest heaving. The men's voices drew closer. "Check the creek." She went left. When one stepped into the open, Noor threw a rock at a distant tree. The sound made him turn. She slipped behind him silently, heart hammering. He swung around too late. She hit him with the flashlight. Once, hard enough to drop him. The second man fired wildly, missing in the dark. Noor ducked low, grabbed the fallen gun, and fired into the air. The sound echoed like thunder. The man fled. When the echoes died, Noor stood alone, soaked, trembling, but alive. The box of evidence was gone, swept away by the current. She fell to her knees, mud on her hands. All that proof. Gone. But as she lifted her head, she saw something glinting in the stream. The tape recorder. She pulled it out, dripping wet but intact. She pressed it to her chest and whispered, "That's enough." By morning, the sun broke through the fog, pale and cold. Noor and Nora returned to the diner, clothes still damp. Nora placed a recorder on the table and pressed play. Fletcher's voice filled the room again, distorted but clear enough. "This time, he's gone too far," Fletcher's voice said. "If the teacher keeps pushing, make it look like an accident." Nora looked up. "That's your father they're talking about." Noor nodded slowly. "Then I'll make sure his accident is the last one they ever fake." That evening, the entire town buzzed with whispers. Mayor Fletcher hadn't been seen all day. The sheriff's office claimed he was out of town. But Noor knew where to find him. The sun dipped low as she walked toward the old council hall, the building half-boarded, forgotten except for late-night meetings. The air smelled of pine smoke and wet earth. She pushed open the door. Fletcher sat alone at his desk, a bottle beside him. He looked older than before, thinner, tired. But when he saw her, his eyes sharpened like knives. "I warned you, Miss Noor," he said softly. "You could have lived a quiet life." "And let my father's death mean nothing?" she said. He poured himself a drink, hand steady. "The world runs on secrets. You think truth changes anything? The town needed jobs. People needed money. You think anyone cares what we buried 40 years ago?" "I do," Noor said. "And they will." He laughed once, short, bitter. "You sound like your father. He thought he could save this place too." "Maybe he still can." She reached into her coat and placed the recorder on the desk. Fletcher's face twitched. "You don't have the tape." "I have your voice," she said. "And tomorrow everyone else will too." For a moment the room went still. Then Fletcher lunged, but Noor stepped back just as he stumbled. The chair toppled, the glass shattered, and the mayor fell to the floor, gasping, clutching his chest. Noor stared down at him, her pulse wild. "You poisoned this town," she whispered. "Now it's your turn to choke on it." He reached for her ankle, then went still. The room fell silent again. She didn't move for a long time. Just listened to the rain begin outside. The town of Darrenfield awoke that morning to a silence no one could explain. The mayor's mansion loomed over the hill like a mausoleum, its lights still burning, its windows black with soot and dust. News spread faster than fire. Mayor Randall Green had been found dead in his study. "Heart failure," the coroner said. But the whispers beneath that official truth were louder, darker, more believable. Some said they saw a woman's shadow leaving his house before dawn. Others swore they heard music, a violin, faint and mournful, playing somewhere in the distance. Noor sat in her small rented flat across the river, watching the headlines unfold on her cracked laptop screen. Her tea had gone cold. The screen, light flickered across her face, pale and distant, but her eyes were alive, not with joy, but with stillness. It was over. The man who destroyed her family was gone. But there was no victory dance, no scream of triumph, just a hollow calm, the kind that comes when a storm finally breaks after years of holding its breath. Outside, rain began to fall, soft and steady, washing the dust off the streets. Noor stood, walked to the window, and whispered to herself, "It's done." But revenge, she learned, doesn't end with the act. It lingers. It changes shape. The next morning, her phone rang, an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, then answered. "Miss Ajar?" The voice was cautious, professional. "This is Detective Wells, Darrenfield PD. We'd like to speak with you regarding the mayor's passing." Noor's pulse didn't rise. She'd expected this. "Of course," she said calmly. "When?" Now. When she arrived at the precinct, everything felt eerily familiar. The flickering lights, the smell of coffee, the whispering officers. But this time, she wasn't there as a suspect or a witness. She was there as a woman who'd already faced the truth and lived. Detective Wells, a man in his 50s with eyes that had seen too much, sat across from her. He flipped through a folder. "You knew Mayor Green?" "I did," she said simply. "You were close to him?" "No." She paused. "Just close enough to see what kind of man he was." He studied her quietly. "His death appears sudden. The coroner says natural causes, but there were inconsistencies." "Inconsistencies?" He looked up. "You were seen near his estate last night." Noor didn't flinch. "I walk that route often." A silence followed. Heavy, testing. Then Wells closed the folder. "I believe you," he said. And something in his voice carried a strange weight. "Men like him make enemies. But you don't seem like the kind of woman who kills for sport." Noor met his eyes. "No," she said softly. "Only for peace." He nodded slowly. "Peace," he repeated. "That's a rare thing to find." When she left the station, the world looked different. Lighter somehow. Not because justice had been served in the way courts might define it, but because balance had been restored. The lies that once choked her life had been burned away, leaving only truth and ash. Weeks passed. The town buried its mayor, the newspapers moved on, and Darrenfield's shiny new council began promising reform. But behind every speech, every headline, the ghost of what happened lingered. The scandal that never made it to print. The quiet rumor that the woman from the archive files had come back and finished what the law never could. Noor moved away soon after. She packed her life into 2 suitcases and a violin case. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. The houseplants she left by the window wilted in her absence. The coffee mug still sat half full on the counter. She rented a small cottage near the sea, a place with more silence than people. There, she spent her mornings writing letters she never sent, and her evenings walking barefoot along the shoreline, the cold water biting at her ankles. Sometimes, she played her violin again, soft, slow notes that carried across the wind like ghosts of an unfinished symphony. One afternoon she received a letter. The envelope was plain, but the handwriting familiar. Detective Wells. Inside was a single line. "Some debts can't be collected through law, only through truth. I hope you found yours." Noor folded the letter carefully and set it beside her violin. For the first time in years, she smiled. Not the smile of a victor, but the smile of someone free. In the quiet of the cottage, she opened her journal and wrote the final words of her story. "Revenge doesn't heal wounds. It only stops the bleeding long enough for you to see how deep it really went." As the sun sank beyond the horizon, Noor stepped outside. The wind brushed through her hair, the salt air stung her lips, and for a moment, everything was still. The past was behind her, unchangeable, yet somehow lighter now that she carried it openly. She looked toward the sea, endless, cold, and untamed, and whispered, "I forgive you." The waves answered softly, as if the world itself exhaled. And in that quiet moment, Noor Azhar disappeared into the twilight. Not as a victim, not as a ghost, but as a woman who had written her own ending. The story of Darrenfield would live on in whispers and files, but her name would not. She had erased herself from their records, leaving behind only a clause, a letter, and a legend.